Welcome to Amici, news and insights from the New York Judiciary and the Unified Court System. I'm John Carr. For the past couple of years, the Gender Fairness Committee of the 3rd Judicial District has been compiling oral histories of the pioneering female judges and attorneys in the 7-county region around Albany. A film documentary on the pioneering woman judges was recently reposted to the court system's YouTube channel at NY Courts, NYCOURTS. The committee, which is chaired by retired Judge Rachel Crutzer, an adjunct professor at Albany Law School, is following up on the video project with a continuing series of oral history interviews with some of the pioneering women lawyers in the region. This week, we're excited to share with you an interview Judge Crutzer and I conducted with Carolyn George. It is September 26, 2018, and we are interviewing Carolyn George. First, when did you decide to go to law school?
Actually, I was in my senior year of college, and I was a French major, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do afterwards. I knew I did not want to teach French, and I went to college at Lemoyne in Syracuse, and one of my friends was going over to Syracuse Law School to hear the new woman dean speak, Judith Younger. And she says, why don't you come along? It's be interesting to see a woman dean speak. And so I went. A couple of us went over, and I was just captivated. I thought her speech was empowering. I just thought she was a huge presence. She looked like a real person. And the tone, the message that she gave was that, even the average person, the average woman, could succeed in the practice of law. And I said, that's it for me. And that was my defining moment.
You hadn't thought about it previously?
I had not. I think generally as far as a career path, I wanted to do something where I had a profession. My dad was a civil engineer, and he held a license and he worked in a firm. So I wanted to do something where I wasn't like a cog in a big company. I wanted to have a profession where if the bottom fell out, I could just open up my own shop and run my own business and be my own person.
And what was the environment like for women at SU in the late 70s?
Well, it's about 25% women. What was interesting about Syracuse in particular is that it drew from literally Alaska and Hawaii. We had students from Alaska and Hawaii in our class. We had returning Vietnam vets. We had stay-at-home moms. We had nurses who were going back to school. So it was very diverse. But the women were not particularly friendly. I think women were treated
to each other? They weren't friendly?
No, there was it was very hard to make friends. It was the friends I had were either male, or they were college friends who were still in Syracuse because I went to college in Syracuse. It was very women were the brilliant ones didn't want anything to do with you, and the other ones were just not a good clique personality wise. I'm not sure why.
Was it a competitive thing, you think?
I think the idea of networking with other women wasn't really, people weren't accepting of that yet. I think it was women can sometimes be competitive with one another. Mm-hmm. And I think no one wanted to give a hand down. They'd rather hope that someone gave them a hand up. And I think the idea of sharing an opportunity with another woman, that just wasn't accepted then. I think it was a much more competitive atmosphere.
That's interesting. So in law school, while you were in law school, did you develop any particular mentors?
Well, unfortunately, the dean, Judith Younger, left after, I think she was only there a year or so. But we had a Professor Travis Lewin, who's still at Syracuse, who was our evidence professor. He was just masterful.
Travis
Lewin, Lewin. And then towards my third year, I took land use planning with professor whose name escapes me at the moment, but he was like the leader in land use planning. He wrote one of the major texts on it, and I never used that right away, but later when I practiced land use and zoning, Robert Anderson was his name. He called back to me the teachings I'd gotten from Professor Anderson, the analysis that he had, and later on I considered him to be a mentor. But I would say those two, Professor Lewin and Professor Anderson.
Were there any women professors at the time?
I just remember one. We had a criminal procedure professor who was very bright. She had obviously an LLM, and she had studied, I think, in England as well. But she was not friendly. She was not known as a hard grader, hard on people when they spoke in class. I would not say that she served as a role model at all. I can't think of any other women that were professors at that time.
Yeah, I had none as well, and I was a contemporary of yours, and
Right.
in my law school, very rare. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then you got out of law school, and is that when you went to the Temporary Commission on Child Welfare?
Yes, and I sort of stumbled into that, just knocking on doors, giving out resumes in downtown Syracuse, and a law firm there, Pinsky and Pliskin. The partner, Phil Pinsky, said, I can't offer you a job with me, but I can offer you a position for the state doing research on laws that affect children. So I was happy for that. I worked there for about a year, and then I realized it was, well, first of all, the funding was drying up, and also I wanted to get in the courtroom. I wanted to do other things, and I felt that as much as it was a respected research position, it was too limiting as a lawyer. I always saw myself as a lawyer as being in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm. And so you left there, and what brought you to Albany?
Well, actually, I'm from Westchester County, a small town called Valhalla, and my husband was from New Jersey, and so having spent many years from college and law school schlepping up to Syracuse from the downstate area, we picked Albany as a middle ground. My uncle was one of the parole board commissioners who lived in Voorheesville, and he was trying to be my kid's favorite uncle. And I felt, and my college roommate was from Clifton Park, so we sort of picked it out as a place where we, could make our way and wasn't too far for our families to come up and see us.
Mm-hmm. And what was the environment like for a young woman lawyer in Albany? And what year are we talking about? 1970?
70. My first job here after the Temporary State Commission was in 1979.
So what was it like in that time?
Well, Pentek Brown and Tobin was a great place to work. I had an inauspicious start. I overslept on my first day, and I didn't have a car, so I had to take the bus.
Mm-hmm.
So I strolled in at 20 after 9, and I'm sure they thought I wasn't going to come at all. But I lucked out by stepping on the elevator with senior partner Bill Pentek. And I think Bill probably thought I'd just been down getting a coffee. He didn't think anything of it. I walked in with Bill, so no one could give me a hard time. As far as practicing with other lawyers, I think were you
the only woman at Pentek Brown?
I was, and then after a few
were you the
years,
first woman at
I was
Pentek
the
Brown?
first in 100 years of the firm. It was originally called Dugan, Lyons, Pentek, Brown, and Tobin, and the original firm dated back 100 years. And I thought personality-wise, that was a good blend with them. They had some, as I said earlier, Tom Brown was particularly very persuasive and had a good way of dealing with people. Ed Tobin was brilliant on the law, and if you could somehow get between the two of them, you're doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
But they did have we had another woman attorney who came along a few years after me, and I felt as an associate I was treated fairly. I think we all knew what each other were paid. Our pay was similar, the men and the women. I don't think assignments were given out unfairly. One thing that did come up was when I became pregnant, and they had to establish a maternity policy.
Which they had never had to worry about before?
No, and they did that begrudgingly, and it was a rather skimpy policy. And then I had a second baby when I worked there, and they gave a little bit more out because by that time, 1987, it was becoming something employers had to offer. So I left because I was offered a job at an insurance company, but then after I left 6 weeks later, they named someone else a partner, which I think they were sort of waiting for me to leave. So,
Pentek was?
Mm-hmm, I believe
so.
so.
Let's go back. What was the environment like? It sounds like the environment at Pentek Brown was as welcoming as it would have been for any neophyte lawyer. Is that accurate?
The standards were pretty much the same for men or women. When I was there during my first year, someone told me it was traditional for associates not to take a vacation the first year, to show your loyalty to the firm by forfeiting your vacation and just working. And it was also a lot of pressure, as in any private firm, to come in on the weekends, which I found to be I just didn't really want to do that. So what I figured out I'd do is I knew who came in on Saturdays, and I'd come in on Sunday afternoon, and I'd review the notes they left for me and put them back on that partner's desk, so they know that I was there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I felt I got out of that because I felt that I did not want to give up my personal life for my job. I felt that there was no way I could be a successful lawyer and raise 2 kids and have a relationship with husband and family with that hanging over my head. I just saw that as a black hole.
Forfeiting vacation and coming in on weekends was expected of males and females?
It was.
Okay, so there wasn't a discrimination issue there at all?
No.
Now,
Did
what
they
about
have meetings at the Fort Orange Club with clients?
I don't think it, actually someone belonged to the university club.
Oh,
Someone belonged to that club. But they would, like say if the partners decided to take associates for lunch, it wasn't that just the guys were taken. I think that, I thought that the women were treated fairly, but then it was when I left, I thought, well, partnership was never, actually we were told partnerships were not gonna happen for a while, and then as soon as I left, somebody got moved up. So
a male. got
Correct.
moved up. Yeah.
Correct.
Now, what about the judges in the courts? What experiences did you have early on as an associate of Penntech Brown in the courts?
Well, as a young lawyer, particularly as a pregnant young lawyer, you were sort of an anomaly. And I remember once being in a deposition, and I was overdue, but there was someone at the firm I was still covering things, and somebody said, well, make sure she takes the chair by the door.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, good-naturedly, and a few times people would say to me, I'm sure we won't see you again after the baby comes, like assuming I was going to retire. And I don't think, but that would be from other lawyers. I don't think there was any either direct or indirect discrimination by judges. The only thing would be if a judge seemed to expect that you'd be available, say, after hours. Like if you need to stay because we're working on a charge at a charge conference, or you need to do research, you're expected to get it done. Whereas men would often have a spouse who could pick the kids up, or could just some other person to help out. Whereas if you didn't want to say, well, Judge, I got to leave by 5:30 to pick my kids up, I'm going to get fined, you really couldn't bring that up, because that it just shouldn't happen. So I felt you had to keep your personal life somewhat invisible. But if you did that, you'd be treated pretty much okay.
Mm-hmm.
But don't try to say that you need to take your kids to a doctor's appointment, and because that wouldn't go very well with the judge. I think that wasn't accepted. I know later it's accepted for men or women, but I think back then you didn't really want to have too many womanly things that interfered with you doing your job.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you gravitate toward defense work because that's a work that was available, because you're interested in it?
Well, in the beginning, I think we just knocked on doors and took what came along. I felt, more. I don't like people who don't take responsibility, and doing civil defense work, often people have no case, they're blame shifting, and that's a popular theme when you're trying a case, defending somebody, is to talk about taking responsibility for your own actions. So I felt that probably morally and emotionally I was more tied into defense work than plaintiff's work. I think I do both now, but I think my natural inclination was towards defense work.
And was it strictly state courts?
We represented the railroads. We represented Amtrak and 2 of the commercial railroads. So we were in federal court regularly before Judge Foley in federal district court, and before I don't think Judge Kahn was there then. So we regularly went to federal court as well as state court.
Was the environment or the climate any different in federal court than it was in state court?
No, I don't think so. I think federal court is more of it just seems like a more important court in some ways, and I think the people were probably better behaved or more professional. I can't think of a single instance where I was discriminated against in a federal court. I tried some cases there. I had many conferences, motions. I can't think of a single instance. And any instances of the state courts, as I said, were somewhat subtle. They were indirect.
Judge Foley, I think he was a Truman appointee. So by the time you came along, he was not a young man.
He was not.
He had come up in a completely different culture, environment. How did he treat women from what you saw?
I thought he was uniform, the same. I can only think of one woman judge I appeared in front of early, which is Judith Hillary in Dutchess County, and she was in Supreme Court. I didn't have a trial with her. I had just a couple of conferences with her, but it wasn't I wanted to see what she looked like or how she came across, because there weren't any women judges that I appeared in front of back then.
Did you find the women judges harder on you or easier on women? Or more demanding on women, less demanding on women?
Well, Karen Peters stands out in my mind. When I first met her, I thought she was, I could see her as a friend, and I thought she was fair. She found out that I worked out. She said, here's a number to my health club. If you're ever down in Kingston, tell them, tell them that you want to work out on as my guest. And I was really impressed with her. I think she's one of the finest judges I've ever had the pleasure of being in front of. And she's a true trailblazer, and I felt that she treated everybody fairly. She was a real pleasure to be in front of.
Now, you went from Pentec Brown to Travelers Insurance, right?
I did.
What was any difference in there in the way women were treated in a private industry rather than a private law firm?
I think in a corporate world, they had to be more careful about doing things equally. We had, the reason I went there is because actually Travelers...
So what year,
yeah.
I'm sorry, what year are we talking about?
I went to Travelers
80s?
in '87.
Okay.
I was home on maternity leave, and I got a phone call from the staff council at Travelers saying, asking if I wanted to work there. And I just said, no, I'm going back to work as a Pentec Manitoba. And then after I went back to work for a few weeks with 2 kids, I said, I cannot do this. So I followed up, and I ended up working there for 8 years. So Travelers had great opportunities for trial training schools that we went to, and we gave seminars, and I think women and men were treated pretty much the same there. There weren't, I mean, I was the first woman, and then while I was there weren't any additional women. I went to another insurance company that did have more women. I was not the first woman at that insurance company, but I think that women at the insurance companies were treated pretty much evenly. I also had great bosses at both places.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, women in Albany County, it was still somewhat of a rarity to see women in courts in Albany County, and we've touched on a little bit of this, but what judges and practitioners other than Karen Peters stand out as particularly supportive of women in those days, and maybe say the Albany County Courthouse?
Well, a real sweetheart was Judge Ned Conway.
Mm.
He was just charming to everybody. He was a great guy, always had time to listen to you. I had a couple trials with Judge Kahn. I thought Kahn was again, I think he seemed like a more modern man who could understand that women might, have a professional job. Who else? Judge, there was a judge in Schenectady, Lynch, Robert Lynch.
Mm-hmm.
I tried quite a few cases with him. He was a great guy to work under. Again, I don't know of any subtle differences. And I don't, again, no overt discrimination by any judges. Those are 3 that stand out in my mind.
When did you start doing some criminal work?
I got into criminal work other than representing people I knew on minor transgressions. I remember being at the old Colony Courthouse when it was where the town hall is now, and that was probably in the 80s, early 90s. And then somewhere around...
Thinking of Klein and Harris. Did you practice before them?
No. I unfortunately I was divorced, and I had my divorce in front of Harris, who can be notoriously unpredictable, and he was a class act. He said to me, I look forward to seeing you again under better circumstances.
Nice.
I thought that went above and beyond. But I got into doing criminal law because of the assigned counsel program. When I was at Ainsworth Sullivan between 2000 and 2005, someone told me about this program, and I thought, well, it's a good way to learn the law. The client's already lost, he's been convicted, and you can only make it better. So I would learn about a suppression hearing, or I'd learn about sentencing standards, or I'd learn about whatever it was, and I still do that today. So I started doing criminal law because I looked at it from the appellate standpoint, and I've had some successes there too. Probably most notably Marquise Dixon, and then a few others. I got someone off on a murder charge, which his mother was very happy about.
So you went from Travelers to One Beacon, and then Ainsworth Sullivan, and Hecker Murphy, and now Friedman, Hershey, and Miller.
Correct.
Any difference in the way women are treated in any of those places? Or any evolution in the way women were treated as you progressed through your career?
Well, I noticed that as more women appeared and stuck it out, firms had to make like maternity policies. It referred to someone as the spouse and not necessarily the wives, like the wives something or other, or the husbands. I think just as our society has generally evolved to be more respectful of women, that's, more came around. Where I am at Freeman Hershey Miller, we have one male attorney and two females, and so and I think we're respected, for what we do and in terms of our pay and our assignments. But I can't think of any negative experiences. I guess in comparison, one of my very first depositions when I was with Pentek Brown and Tobin, I lugged my bag up to the deposition room, and then the other attorney walked in and said, "So where is your machine?" And I
Yes.
said, "Excuse me?" And so after I indignantly convinced him that I was in fact a defense attorney, he said, "Well, then you go first. You question first." I said, "Thank you." You don't see
Yes.
that anymore.
Oh, yes, that, I remember it well, and others have reported the same. We were
Yeah.
always mistaken for the court
Mhm.
reporter.
I-
Yeah.
You mentioned a divorce, and we found that with nearly all the pioneering women we've been interviewing, either they're single, divorced, very few have children. Marge Carell was a significant departure from that. I don't know how many kids she had, but a whole
Well,
bunch of
that's
them.
because she started in the field after she had, her kids
Okay,
were
okay.
mostly raised.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
can you discuss the stresses and strains that a woman makes to become a successful lawyer?
Well, you need.
In a personal way?
That's a very valid point. It's because work is uncertain. I mean, now people are more respectful of things like flex time, but back then when you're expected to, say prepare for trial for the next day, you still had to juggle all the other things that you had to do, and I didn't have the benefit of family close by, and I didn't have a supportive former spouse, so it all fell on me. So I spent a lot of late nights at the dining room table after the kids went to bed, preparing for trial the next day. And you just sort of always hope that it worked out. I mean, you hope that you get back from Poughkeepsie in time to pick your kids up. I had a small network of people I could count on. Like if I couldn't get back, I could call somebody who would take my kids home and I'd get them later. But you really you could only trust a few people because you don't want to get the reputation of being unreliable. And I'm glad I had kids, and I'm glad that it worked out that way. But as you started off in the field of law, women often, I noticed, would sort of step aside from being in private practice because of that reason. They wanted to have time for family, or that's pretty much it. So they went to a more, say, 9-to-5 job, so they didn't have to do the juggling that we had to do. It was very difficult. I don't know how I got through it at times. And I had kids that turned out just fine. And I remarried 11 years ago, so I think it turned out just fine for me.
I don't know I have no idea what the divorce rate is for women lawyers, but I wonder if it's changed, and maybe what the divorce rate is for male lawyers as well. But I don't know if either of you would know the answer to that, probably.
No, but that's an interesting thing to research, actually. Now that you mention it, in my capacity.
CLE material?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
You were well into your career, 5 or 6 years into it. For the first time in the history, we have a woman on the Court of Appeals, Judith Kay, of course, and 15 years into it until Carolyn Peters, as you mentioned earlier, is the first woman from the Third Department on the Appellate Division. Of course, there was a woman there previously, but she wasn't from the Third Department. We had to import somebody from Buffalo, Judge Michael. What did those events mean to you, if anything? Judith Kay and Carolyn Peters.
Well, I've argued in every appellate division and in the Court of Appeals once, and whenever I remember appearing in front of Judge Michael in Third Department, and when I would argue in the appellate division, I always felt pleased that I sort of pitched my arguments at the female judge. And when I argued in the Court of Appeals, I believe there were 2. I think as Judge Reed was there as well. So I thought I personally gravitated towards them when I was making an argument. I thought they would understand me better as a kindred spirit. I think there still is a shortage of women judges. And again, it's hard to be good at everything. If you want to raise a family, it may preclude you from spending the time and be on the career track that you want to be a judge. It's still, I think there still is a glass ceiling. Sometimes I'm not sure how much the needle has moved. I know there have been all-women law firms around here, and I don't know that they're as successful as law firms with men. I mean, just as an aside, we realize that our firm, that our boss, who's male, he'll get more money when he settles the case than we will. If we go down to settle the case, they won't pay us as much money as when he goes to settle the case.
Mm.
So we know that. We share as partners in the overall profits of the firm, so we don't mind that. But we know in many instances that his name will bring the money
Mhm.
that ours don't. It's not due to ability, it's because he's a man.
Is he better known?
He has a great reputation. He's a wonderful person to learn from. He's not a showboater. He's very quiet, reserved, he is well known. But I'm in super lawyers too.
Mhm.
So is he a great trial lawyer? Probably a better trial lawyer than me. But we also know that if he goes down to settle the case, they'll probably pay him more money than they will us,
Mm.
even in 2018.
But getting back to that question, was the moment when Judith Kay got appointed, is something memorable? Do you remember that moment?
Yes,
Did
and
you care?
I've met her a couple times. I met her at state bar functions, and I thought she was just a lovely woman, warm and friendly, terrific writer.
Mhm.
And I do remember when she was appointed, it was kind of a big deal. It was reminded me of when Judith Younger became the dean of Syracuse Law School. Was a big deal, a very big deal, like late in coming.
Same with Karen Peters?
Yes, I didn't know of her because I didn't practice in family law. I didn't know of her background. I did have one of her first trials, and many times argued in the appellate division in front of her. And I was always so impressed with her. I had tears in my eyes when she had her retirement party when her son was there. It was just a wonderful moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what should future generations know about what it was like to be a woman lawyer in the 70s and early 80s and on?
I think
what advice do you have for them?
Well, I think back then we had to quietly break trails. I think I always felt that for personally one of my strengths was just being likable. I may not be the smartest person in the room, but I think I'm pretty likable, and I think I can get along with people pretty well. And I can get the job done. As a lawyer, a lot of times people just hire us to take care of a problem. That's kind of the oversimplification of what we're doing. So I think back then we wanted to be respected as lawyers without trying to be, offensive. And I think today that's still a good approach, but I think today you can feel more comfortable networking. You can call up a colleague, a woman. You can help another woman without it taking away from yourself. Whereas I think back then it was much more competitive. So I think advice I give today, it's a wonderful profession. I mean, everything we do and see, we're shaded by our eyes that we judge things as attorneys. My clock is always on all day long. And it's a terrific profession, and you can have a lot of success and make some money at it. So I think there's lots of room for women of law. I'm thrilled to get over to the law school to judge women. I do that at Syracuse, my alma mater. I've judged trials over there and court, and I'm so excited to see so many women doing that of all different kinds. And as far as advice for today, I just keep plugging. Don't let it deter you. There's room for women now of different types and diversity that there wasn't back then. So I wish I had a magic wand. I wish I had a capsule of the perfect advice to give somebody today. I don't. That's sort of my looking back after 40 years.
I'd like to revisit something that you mentioned a moment ago and when we first started about the networking and how it was kind of non-existent in law school and became much more so now. I would have actually kind of thought it would be the opposite, because the networking would have seemed so much more vital in the 70s than now. Why do you think that has changed? There's no reason to be less competitive now, I guess, than it was then. So why has it changed?
Well, I think there's more women. I think there's just more women. I think for a lot of things, networking is the way to go. And maybe it was, and I don't think it was unique to Syracuse though. I think back then is if you knew something, you hung on to it yourself. You didn't, there people really didn't work in blocks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's only 25% women in my law school, but that include women of diverse backgrounds, older women who are married, women of color, and just different types of women, that we didn't have a cohesive group. And I think because stuff went on more in the overall group of things. If you isolated yourself as a woman, it meant you didn't know what was going on in, say, the larger group of the things as a whole. When I was in law school, I was also editor of a newspaper, and I was in a fraternity, social fraternity, because that's how you find out what's going on, and you know, you're working with people.
They didn't have a women's law caucus then.
They did. It was just not well received, and not all women belonged. There was no incentive or pressure to join women's groups. I mean, yes, the law school did have the ones they speak about in the brochure. I don't think it was something where everybody joined. I don't think people saw a benefit out of that. It was more of a splinter group. And
I don't even remember a women's law caucus.
we did have one at Syracuse, yes, yeah. But I think just because today many people we get work, for example, through referrals. I think it's just a more natural thing of like networking with people, either to get a job or to refer work on to someone, whereas back then people were more hesitant because it might take away from them. And I don't think it was just doesn't happen I mean, here you just email somebody or go to somebody's website, whereas back then you had to sit down with somebody and I guess take more effort to share something with someone. And I just think it was just a product of the times back then.
Mm-hmm. I think women are more likely to refer cases to other women.
That's a good question. When I refer a case to somebody, if it's something I don't do, for example, I don't necessarily want to pick somebody's lawyer. If it's in an area I don't practice in, I wouldn't know who's good. So I just put that as a preface. I don't necessarily pick an attorney based on male or female,
Mm-hmm.
but I have recommended people to women. There's a very good someone who does. Of course, matrimonial, I have some people I refer there, and then there's a woman who does school law, helping families get IEPs for their children with learning disabilities. The person I have in mind is female. I don't necessarily think of women in particular that I want to give that person a woman.
You want to give them a good lawyer.
Correct, right. I always try to give two choices, though. This past year, I was a co-coach of the Albany High School mock trial team. And it was the first time they had a team in over 20 years. And I was the older woman coach, and the other person was a younger male coach. So we felt we did counterpoint because we're both live in the city, but we came from different backgrounds that could present different perspectives.
Mm-hmm. What did I forget?
I can't think of anything you forgot, but following up on the style, you have a style, you're easy to work with, you know, I wonder if you thought that by being aggressive as a woman, that might have been received poorly.
Yeah, my personality doesn't really do aggressive, and I think that's probably something that doesn't. I don't work well in that. I can be persuasive, but I'm not aggressive, and I'm not combative. I think I'm more conciliatory, or let's just find a way to solve this.
And that's something that often people say women bring to a situation. They're more conciliatory and bring people together. But there was, I think, a perception that it was a negative perception of aggressive women.
I would definitely
so many
agree
of
with
us
that. Yeah.
learned to be very conciliatory.
I think we make good mediators.
Even those for whom it did not come naturally, like you.
Well, and I think women, that's why we make good mediators or arbitrators, because we can find solutions. I mean, even something as simple as a real estate closing, people can sit there with their arms folded and say, well, you know, it's my way or the highway, but
Or you can solve the problem.
Yeah, it's around the hallway. We're gonna solve this. We're gonna all walk out of this room. We're gonna get this solved somehow. You know, and you just basically negotiate an outcome, because that's what you have to do. You can you can fold up your file and go back, but your client's gonna sit there and say, well, how come we didn't close? You can't lose your temper. I mean, you have to find a way to get the job done. It's what they hired you to do.
I think that men are often hampered by their testosterone. They can't help themselves. It's just part of this, just something within them. So they're
I think
combative.
that's true.
And maybe it helps them in a trial, but certainly not in the arbitration mediation context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was fortunate to learn from people who taught me how to settle a case, how to get, how to make demands and how to respond. I had great people, and actually the people I'm thinking of are all male, because there weren't any before me. But I had, good models of people I work with and how to bring up settlement and how to get to the, when to tell the client, what to tell the client. I was fortunate, and every day I'm still learning new things, but I was fortunate to learn with people who saw the big picture and see that our job is to solve problems and get it done. You're not, no one's going to pay you to just flaunt your big ego. You're paying you to get a job done. I try to see it as what would I want if I was the client, and I try to put myself in the client's shoes. But maybe today I'm a personal injury plaintiff, and then maybe tomorrow I'm defending a municipality. So you have to look at it. What would the client want?
So, is there anything we missed that you'd like to bring out?
Not that I can think of. There's a lot of little anecdotal things that happen over the years.
Please. Want to hear 'em?
Well, yeah.
Are we about to get some Me Too moments here?
Oh no, actually I have zero to contribute. But I was.
I'm actually pleased to hear that.
Yeah, I know. Because I told my husband, there's nothing out there. You're going to find out. But I was. My son was attending a Siena summer school program one year, and I was going to be. I was on trial in Troy with. I can't think. It was Keegan, Judge Keegan, and it was. I saw myself. I wasn't going to I had to pick him up at noontime and park him someplace so I could do my summation. And I didn't really want to have him sitting in the courtroom because everybody would know that he was my son. And I didn't want anybody to say, oh, yeah, she had a child care problem or something, even though he was probably 14. He wasn't a baby. So I went out, picked him up from this summer school program, brought him down to Troy, and he had something he could color or something to work on back at the time. So I said, would you mind sitting outside? I have to make a speech. And if I do the speech right, I will win my case. He goes, okay. So he sat outside. I did my summation. I come out. He goes, did you win? I said, yeah. So, it was just the interplay of when kids and work align. But I thought I was proud of my son and thought he would be well behaved sitting there. I said, that's not the goal here. The goal is to win the case. And I didn't want my son sitting there and he would understand enough that he sat outside. So it was just one of those things, just sometimes the way things happen. And then on a negative, I was up in Plattsburgh one time going to a settlement conference. So I walk in and I find where the lawyer's room is. So I walk in and I said, I'm looking for whoever it was, my adversary. The person I talked to said, hey, so-and-so, there's a gal lawyer here looking for you. I'm like, okay. And I knew I was in the old boys club because I noticed that they were all drinking out of ceramic coffee cups. Like they had their own cups. And I didn't have a cup and I was an outsider. And I was a gal lawyer. And I thought, this isn't going to go well. So, but I didn't, I guess I was a little bit miffed, but then I got over it because again, it wasn't about me. Clients expected me to move the case forward in some fashion. So, but that's probably about as bad as it ever got, being called a gal lawyer. I don't have a Me Too moment. And it's probably about the most, no one ever criticized my clothing or said anything sexist to me, but that was inappropriate. But that's about as far as I've ever experienced.
You were fortunate.
I was. I've had a very lucky career. Every time I wanted a job, jobs always came along. I'm a runner, and I was at a race one time, and a friend of mine said, he'd been at the office earlier in the day, and I said, oh, the office on a Saturday? He goes, yeah. He goes, I go in, and he goes, why don't you come work for us? And I was at the insurance company, One Beacon at the time. I said, what about for me? I said, that's a good idea. That was my job interview. That's how I was hired. As simple as that.
Oh, I have one thought. Bathrooms have come out in some of our interviews.
Yes.
More than you would think. Actually, I was going to ask that.
So, were there enough women's bathrooms at Syracuse Law?
I read the interview and I noticed that, and I've heard that from other people about Albany Law. The only thing I recall about Syracuse is that the women's bathroom was hard to access. It was not close to going and then coming back for class. I can't say there was a shortage, and the school's been rebuilt twice since then. But I remember the bathroom that you most often use was hard to get to.
Yeah. Kate Doyle told us a story. I don't know if you saw it about Albany Law School and the bathroom being at the exact opposite place on campus where she had to be in class, and said they just dart through traffic and go over an Albany Med.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there was a professor that she said that would, once the clock struck the time the class was supposed to start, he'd lock the door, so you couldn't get in. And so you couldn't risk being late, so you'd rather risk the traffic on New Scotland Avenue.
Wow. That's really not fair. Yeah.
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 Now, when you met with clients and the firm had this agreement or this membership at the university club, did you have any problems just walking in with a client on your own?
No, we the only time we went there was for like a firm function, like
I see.
like a Christmas party or something like that. We didn't have the right to. I was an associate. I was not a partner until my current job, so I didn't have the opportunity to interview clients down there. So
Yeah, oh, I remember being smuggled in the back door at the Fort Orange Club by people, and then I decided but that was before we decided we weren't going to go to the Fort Orange
Yeah.
Club until they changed their
Yeah.
policy.
well, we had a case come up some years ago in my current job where it was a labor law case, and I was talking to the claim rep from Buffalo about the trial, and he said, "But we expected so and so to try the case," and I said, "Well, he's asked me to try." He goes, "But we wanted a man trying the case."
Oh.
This was actually, I forgot about this, it was maybe a few years ago. And so he talked to the claim rep and said, she's handled all depositions, she's going to handle it. And the claim rep tried to indicate that they only chose our firm because this particular lawyer was going to try the case. And maybe we forgot about that and other people handled it. So anyway, I did meet with the fellow. He came out to the trial and begrudgingly and so forth. And you know what? I got a no cause. So it was a case where the demand was $700,000 when it went to the jury. The offer was $70,000, and we got a no cause in an hour. So he was, so he's pleased with that. But I was just kind
I
of.
hope he was a little chagrined.
Well, I was kind of surprised that this late in the game. I think I would say around 2013 or 14. At this late in the game, somebody would say, "But we expected a man to try the case," and I was like, "Really? I mean, that's sort of old-fashioned. Nobody thinks that way anymore, or they shouldn't think that way ever." But I just surprised that somebody would come out with that in quote this day and age.
Thanks for listening to Amici. You find all of our recent podcasts on the court system's website at www.nycourts.gov. Most are also in the iTunes podcast library. If you have a suggestion for an Amici podcast, please let me know. I'm John Carr, and I can be reached at 518-453-8669 or jcaher@nycourts.gov. In the meantime, stay tuned.